So for the new people, every 2 months, I think I join in these webinars. So we have these webinars every month, and then every 2 months I join. And what we started doing is I'll do a topic. And last time we did the topic is grounding, and we can send you that one if you'd like. But you want to have a topic, and Emma Shotton, I think, came up with this suggestion of talking about forgiveness. The idea is that it's sort of like a mini training, that we have a topic and then we'll talk about that topic, and you can ask questions, share your experiences, you know, anything like that. So, and if you go off track and you want to talk about something else, that's fine as well. So this evening's session is on the subject of forgiveness. And I have written about forgiveness in my upcoming book. So I'm going to read you a little bit about that. And there's also a really nice quote by Rumi that I've dug out for you, which I'd like to read. But before we start, I thought I would ask if there are any questions or anything around this subject you'd like me to talk about specifically. That's the first thing. Just
ask you if you can talk on the subject of forgiveness, combining the boundaries, keeping your boundaries.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
And like it's my vulnerable point. I'm a very forgiving person. For me, it's like very easy to forgive, but it's hard to set up boundaries in order to protect myself, in order not to need to forgive nobody.
Yeah. Okay. Good.
Yeah.
Good point. Really good point. Yeah. You know, because it's so easy to go to the topic of, for people who can't forgive, but what it's like when you can forgive. Yeah, I really love that. Okay. So to me, forgiveness is not about forgiving the act. And it's not even about the other person. For me, forgiveness points to forgiving ourselves, really, and finding compassion for ourselves. And what I mean by that is that when I was young, I was very badly treated. I was abused, I was badly treated, I was mentally abused, I was neglected, and I grew up thinking that that was normal in a way. And I continued to be abused by everyone, men in particular, but you know, all men. I seemed to attract men that were abusive and violent, and I did this over and over again. And even when each step for me was a learning curve. So initially, as a young woman, when I had my son, I realized I had to look after another human being, and I couldn't keep allowing myself to be so hurt all the time. And so that was an insight, if you like. And so after that, I actually stopped attracting violent men. I don't even know how that worked, but I just decided I wasn't going to have violence in my life anymore. And then, as it does, you know, now I know what you see in your head is what you see in the world. And so I stopped attracting violent men, but I still attracted people who would mentally hurt me and abuse me. and just not be very nice to me. And I recently discovered that I had something called complex personality. Hard thing to say. So I recently discovered that that's what was going on. And when I discovered that, I felt such relief at my own behavior. Like, what, you know, at the stuff that I looked at as to my part in those things, I even said it in that sentence, I attracted those people. I held on to, even though I didn't know it, a lot of blame for myself for what happened to me as a child. Somehow, even though it looks really crazy now to me to even think this, and if somebody else said it to me, I would go, of course it wasn't your fault, you were a child. Somehow I absolutely believed that I could have been better, prettier, more intelligent, you know, something that would have prevented that somehow I was to blame. And I saw my mother regularly beaten and abused as well. So I also took on the blame for that. If I'd have stopped that, if I'd have not been so naughty, etc. And even though those things as an adult didn't really make sense to me, you know, I wouldn't go around saying, oh, it was my fault. But that's what I carried in my consciousness of the world. But I also carried this belief that, you know, real love is when somebody's really jealous and possessive and doesn't let you do anything and so on. So I had a really skewed attitude towards love. So I hope this is not oversharing, but it's all to lay down that there was a lot, and it's taken me a long time to unpick the parts of it, as in I've had insights and then things have got a bit better, and then insights and things got a bit better, and insights and things got a bit better. So the first one being my son and deciding that I wasn't going to have a violent partner anymore, and therefore not attracting violent partners. And eventually, when I was 40, I realized I had let my dad's way and my dad's behavior towards me affect my whole life and affect my relationships and affect the way I was in the world and what I thought of myself, which was pretty low. I had very, very low self-esteem. And a fella would only have to look at me, you know, like touch my arm, and I'd be madly in love and think they were the one, and so on. And I went through this cycle constantly. Anyway, when I was just about to be 40 and I was about to have a major operation, I'd had a conversation with my father, and I had another insight, realizing, oh, wow, this man has totally ruled my life, and I don't need to do that anymore. And so then that was another level. Now, all of these insights were, to me, random. I didn't know about the 3 principles, and I didn't know that that's how life worked. But I see that they were really helpful. And I never tried to forgive my parents. My mom was neglectful. She was an alcoholic. She didn't know any better. I know now. And she could be quite violent, but she also suffered with terrible depression. And so she just didn't take care of us. You know, we were little rat rugs. And I never tried to forgive my parents. I just tried, as I got older, to not walk around with the shame that I felt. I tried to be okay with how it was. Anyway, fast forward to 2017 or 2016, and I was invited to work in a sex offenders prison, which I think the PC term is prison for people who have committed sexual offences. And it was right next door to HMP Onley, which was the prison where it all started. And in HMP Onley, I had absolutely nothing on the people in there. I loved them as if they were my own children. I had nothing on the crimes that they'd committed, had no thinking about even their behavior in the prison. I just lovingly saw them as boys who hadn't grown up and hadn't been helped to see how to be in the world. And I trusted totally that they had all the wisdom that they needed, and that they would find that, and that they would find their way. When I was invited to go next door, I had a lot of thinking. I had a lot of thinking, and I was aware of it. And I was also aware that that came from my background, whereas with the boys in Onley, I had nothing on that. You know, like I had an uncle who'd been in and out of prison. He was an alcoholic, and he used to get up to all sorts of shenanigans. But I'd never been adversely impacted by anything like that. I'd been mugged a couple of times, but I hadn't. Once I'd had my realization about the potential within every human being, just none of that occurred to me. However, it was different in this prison, and I could tell. Also, the people were different. I was used to Onley, and Onley was an overspill prison for people from London. And so they were just like cheeky and noisy, and like playing music and playing up, and you know, again, you can tell by the way I'm talking, I just thought it was cute, really. Even though sometimes it irritated me, for sure. It didn't upset me. These other men, they were quiet. They were they didn't hang around in groups. They were very isolated. They didn't come into group going all noisy and questioning and challenging. They came into group and just sat down and looked and stared at us. And it was perturbing, you know. I made something of that. Oh, these people are different. These men are different. And I tried my best to be level-headed, but I did make something of it. And I would take more precautions. So, you know, I wouldn't stand with my back to people, for instance. I was always aware of where the men were in relation to me, and just little, you know, I'd be very careful making a drink, and I wasn't tactile with them at all, which you're not supposed to be fair. But in the groups in Onley, you know, we've sort of all fell in love with each other, so we'd all be like secretly hugging, and you know, it's just like there was such a lot of bonhomie and joy in the room. It was almost impossible to avoid touching. So I'd got this head, and I tried to be, you know, not affected, but I forgave myself for it. I was where I was, you know, so I accepted that that's just where I was. And then one day in group, a man sitting to the right of me said something which I don't even remember, and the way he said it, there was like a crack opened in my heart, and I suddenly felt total forgiveness towards my parents. What came to mind was my parents were innocent. They've both died. My parents were innocent, and the man saw something had happened to me. He saw, you know, the light came on, and he said, "What just happened?" And I told him, and it felt like it was only me and him in the room, and I told him, and in the telling, he also had an insight, and he also lit up, and he said, "Oh wow, I see what you mean." And so we had this like massive moment of insight between us, which filled the room. Like everybody in the room was impacted. And then I realized that they're innocent. These boys were innocent. And it's really hard to think that there was a man, and I never did this again, but when I got home, my colleague that was working with me at the time, Paul Locke, had Googled the man, and we're told not to do that, not just because it's really not a good idea, because you fill your head with all sorts of stuff, but because the press is sensationalist, so it never tells the whole story. You know, it'll put and you Google anybody, you Google the people we love, you know, let's say you Google Derek, there might be a nasty picture with a nasty face, and you know, they sensationalize the crime and so on. So it's really not a good idea to Google people, because it's very one-sided. And I knew this, but Paul had Googled this fella, so and he said, "Oh gosh, you know, you wouldn't believe what he's done," and he wouldn't tell me. So I Googled him, and think of the very worstest thing that you can think of. He'd done, in my view, the very, very worstest thing that anybody could do. And I'm not going to tell you what it was, because it's upsetting. And I went into a deep depression for the whole weekend. I thought, what am I doing? Like, is it true that nobody's, you know, broken? It was really, really discombobulated. Threw me off, and Paul actually threw us both off our axis. And I just stayed on the sofa, Netflixed and cried and contemplated my navel, you know, and just didn't know what to do. And then by the end of the weekend, I felt a shift. And what had occurred to me was, there isn't a line. If this is true, if it's true that no one's born evil, there isn't a line. It can't be, and there can't be an exception. So it's either not true for anyone, and therefore give up the ghost, or it's true for everyone. And for whatever reason, I decided it was true for everyone. And so I felt like, well, okay, this person definitely should never leave prison. But it doesn't mean he has to suffer in prison. He's in prison. He's lost his liberty for the rest of his life. I mean, he was in prison for several life sentences. He's never going to be free. That's the punishment, right? But we can help him not suffer, because he was suffering in prison. He was drinking and drugging and fighting and everything. So I decided that it was true for everyone. Now, as mind has it, I was running some follow-up groups on my own, and I was allowed 3 men in the room. And I turned up to do a follow-up group, and he was one of them, and the other 2 didn't turn up. So I had 3 hours with this chap. I call him Miles in the book. And at first I thought, I don't know if this is good or not, but it's what's been thrown my way, so we'll see how it goes. And I gave a little caveat that we could end the meeting, and could someone, you know, and have the panic alarm and all of that. Not, I didn't think he was going to hurt me. I just thought that I would not be able to cope with being with him. And because we're on our own, he told me his story. And oh my gosh, from the age of 3 or 4, he was a lad born into a IRA family. Anastasia, that's the Irish Republic Army. And back in a time when the Troubles were on in Ireland and the UK. And from the age of 3 or 4, he was taken in to see his uncles and brothers and so on in prison, with weapons and drugs inside his body, so inserted into his body. And then when they were at the visiting, he'd have to get them out and hand them over. So that's what happened to him, and many other things. So when he was older, he was just drinking and drugging and doing a bad lifestyle. And he ended up in this ring of badness, and did this bad thing. And he was so ashamed of himself, of what he'd done, of everything, that the way he coped in prison was, again, drinking, drugging and fighting, you know, getting himself beaten up all the time, because by allowing people to hurt him, you know, relieved sometimes. And I asked him, and he'd stopped doing that since the group, which is like about perhaps even a year, but 6 months to a year previously. And I said, well, what changed? And he said that he heard something in the group that reminded him of church, and it made a light go on inside, and it just reminded him enough that he then went to church and started getting involved in his religion again. But he was still sort of playing up on the wing and everything. And one day he was standing on the wing, and the nurse came, and he was giving her the evil eye, because she hadn't given him his antidepressant tablets. And so he was giving her the evil eye and really like being nasty, and kept glad eyeing her across the room and all of this. And he suddenly thought, oh, hang on a minute. She hasn't given me my antidepressants, and I'm not depressed. So maybe I don't need them. And he had this massive insight. And he actually then came off antidepressants, and he said, I can just choose to be happy. I'm choosing to be depressed because it's a coping mechanism for what I, you know, sort of blamed myself for. And then he, you know, he got himself a job. He'd already been in prison 10 years at this point. So he'd been doing that cycle. And there's a myth in prison, if you're on a very long stretch, that if you're on a long stretch, basically play up for the first 10 years, and then after that settle down. I can't even remember why this strange myth went around. But obviously what happens after 10 years, you don't know how to be good because you've been naughty for the last 10 years. But anyway, he played up for 10 years, and he said, you know, I want to help other people. And he'd started to, there was a lot of disabled people in that prison as well. And he'd started to, and they got really bullied, and they would get raped and all sorts of things. And he'd started to protect those people and look out for them, and take them food and things like this. And he said he discovered the peacemaker inside, and that the peacemaker had always been hidden, and that now he wanted to live his true self, which was this peacemaker. Miles isn't his real name, by the way. Those two stories about me seeing that my parents were innocent, and then Miles, really taught me something about forgiveness, that the hardest person to forgive is ourselves. The hardest person to love is ourselves. And that when we look in the direction of loving, forgiving, accepting, being ourselves, the rest makes sense of itself. So to go to your point, Anastasia, about the boundaries, if you start inside, the boundaries come with the territory. Because if we forgive those around us, like I would have done, all those people who hurt me, you know, I kept forgiving them and having them back and everything. From there, I have to think about what sort of boundaries to put in place, and I have to be vigilant, and I have to look out for certain patterns of behavior. Whereas when it comes from the inside, when it's actually myself that I'm forgiving or loving or accepting, the boundaries come with the territory. The appropriate boundaries come with the territory. So I for a long time, once I'd got out of that pattern, that cycle of abuse that I'd been in, I then dated people that I could basically walk all over, and you know, that would never hurt me because I bullied them. So the aggressed became the aggressor, and I didn't think I could have a relationship with an alpha male. And then when I met my husband, that was very difficult because he's an alpha male. He's as soft as anything, and he's massively spiritual, but he's a strong alpha male, and he's certainly opinionated. And I found us clashing all the time. And I was scared. There were times when I was scared, but he would never, ever hurt me, physically or mentally or verbally. He would never, ever hurt me. And I really started to see the hurt was in me. You know, I was looking for the hurt. I was looking for the scab to pick. And the more that I looked towards that, loving myself and understanding myself, the more natural boundaries came into play. So if there was a boundary needed, it would occur to me, and then if that had to grow, that would occur to me. So it made more sense that way around. And then to finish off, the CPTSD diagnosis was only recent. And it was like a missing piece to the jigsaw. Because for me, I don't care about that diagnosis whatsoever, apart from, and not that it was an official diagnosis, by the way, but apart from, oh, that's what I was doing. Because I was in this cycle of trauma and healing, and then trauma and healing, actually my own behaviors were off the back of that. And then as I emerged from that, and as I started to take care of myself more and actually care about how people treated me or felt that I deserved to be loved because I was loved, as that started to emerge over a very long time, those are the behaviors that could get me into trouble dropped away. And so that final, maybe it's not the final piece, but the latest piece of the jigsaw really brought relief and forgiveness to myself. And then I saw how innocently I'd put myself into situations where probably weren't the best situations for me. And I'm not saying that it was my fault what happened to me, but I'm saying that I had a part in it, you know. So I can get very feisty, and I could get very feisty and be aggressive myself, because that's what I'd seen. That's how you sort problems out, right? So I could get aggressive and I could throw things and hit. And that's not appropriate either. But only by loving myself could I start to recognize that. And then, I mean, I just don't get into those situations anymore. And I was amazed that I could work in prison. And so a lot of forgiveness must have taken place before that I could have the self-esteem to work in prison, because sex and sexual innuendo was never a thing. To me, we were serving a higher purpose. So when there was flirtation or anything like that, it just was completely over my head. And because I was so grounded and so boundaried, I didn't have to not receive a hug. I mean, some of the boys were cheeky, you know, and they kiss you on the cheek sometimes and get, you know, laugh to get away with it and things like that. But it was never, in my past, I'd have felt that frisson and there'd have been something and, you know, confusion. Whereas for me, it always felt like, that's a bit cheeky, you know, you can't do that. But it was nothing. It's just because they hadn't seen yet what else was on offer. And I knew that what else was on offer was so much more beautiful and powerful, that it was not about me. Actually, I did have a big insight just before I went into prison, which was, I've attracted a lot of people over my life, and I've never understood why. But I've had a lot of male attention. I've had lots of marriage offers. I've had lots of people trying to save me. And I've never understood why. And I was on a bus and this man started chatting me up. And I suddenly realized I have a light. I have a light, and that's what they're attracted to. And when I realized I had a light, then it wasn't about sex, and it wasn't about attraction. It was about, they're looking for a light, and I was a light, and that's why I was a bit of a, you know, flame to the moths. Like we all are, but I didn't know that about myself. So anyway, I'll pause there. I know I've talked a lot. I hope that's okay. I didn't plan to say all of that. Well, I hope that's been useful, and I'd love to hear any feedback or questions, especially, has it helped you, Anastasia?
Yes, Jacqueline, thank you very much for the stories. To be honest, it like pointed exactly the things that I needed to hear. I had a similar situations in my childhood and my life in general with men also. So seeing this point of view, it's like bringing a little bit of light in the darkness.
Yeah.
Or seeing a different way of seeing the things. And to be honest, yeah, you're right. If you're seeing from inside yourself. So for me, it's true. For me, it was easy to forgive the people around, but without forgiving myself, like they're even innocently or inconsciently, I don't know if I pronounce this right. Some way I feel like I had blamed myself for allowing these people treat me this way. Now I see that I wasn't doing it on purpose, or it wasn't my fault, or it just happened and that's it.
Yeah, that's beautiful. There's obviously Mars's chapter, but there's a lot of forgiveness in here. And first of all, there's a Sid quote. And what I've actually called this chapter is, I'm only going to read 2 paragraphs. It's not about forgiveness. And I quote Sid, who says, all human psyches are rooted in universal truth. And no person's psyche is better than any others. All human psyches are rooted in universal truth, and no person's psyche is better than any others. Now, for me, I could see that in other people, but I couldn't see it in myself. And that's the place to look. If that's true for everyone, it's true for me too. It's true for you too. And then I've said, forgiveness is never about the other person. It's about accepting our story and embracing our own life. Letting go what holds back the light we are meant to shine. It does not mean the acts done to us are acceptable. It's about realizing that an act forced upon us doesn't define us. We're not our behavior, nor what's been done to us. If we were, we'd all be fucked. It's not about forgiveness. It's not about empathy. It's not about compassion. These feelings are all products of peace. And here's what I mean. Forgiveness, empathy, compassion all came to me after I realized from the depth of my being that I am okay no matter what. Not one thing can harm my spirit nor anyone else's. I realized that everything I am, everything I can be, and everything I've learned are merely pointers to the infinite potential of who I am, and that this is true for all human beings.
Interesting, Jacqueline, what you said there about how we find it easier to see in others, and it's so common because we do. We're all in the buddy system on here, so I would say we're good at being compassionate and seeing the health and resilience and well-being in the people we write to or just people around us. But I continually forget that about myself. And then my first ever insight, I've said it before, was seeing myself, what I see in my students at school. I always see the well-being, I just see it. And I continue, and it will continue to happen because it just does. It's just the way I am. But then I said, oh, right, I see here. I'm just not seeing that in myself. So it's just, it just popped up. But I think a lot of us, I don't know, a lot of us just, aren't so good at seeing it in ourselves, or so practiced at seeing it in ourselves that, we are beautiful beings and we have everything we need, and we will trip up and make mistakes. So the beauty you see in other people, it's just a mirror. See it in yourself. But we will forget, we'll forget. I think this, community you brought together, and it's probably quite a common 3 principles thing, that we're really good at seeing that in other people, and possibly, we forget to see it in ourselves. Mavis Candid does something sometimes quite a lot. She gets people to find a photograph of themselves when they're young, very young, and to look at that. If you want to see the beauty in yourselves, look at yourself as a child. The first time I did it, and I was on camera with her and a group of people, and I got the photo and put it next to me, and then I missed about half an hour of what she was talking about, because I was struck by this beautiful person in this picture that I hadn't met before, really. I mean, Jacqueline, I hadn't met this person. And then from there, I had a similar thing in a mirror. It happened to you once.
Yeah.
And it's quite powerful. But yeah, to really see yourself and see that all this beauty you're seeing in other people, how compassionate and caring we can be, to do that. for ourselves as well. It's what it is. It's just, for me, it's harder to do because I continually forget, and then I remind myself.
Yeah, it's beautiful. I love that.
Yeah, and I don't mind that I could forget it. It keeps bouncing back. Maybe over time I'll get better at it, and that's which is fine, which is
And
absolutely
there's a lot
fine.
of invisible thought. There's a lot of stuff that you've held on to, or I've held on to for many years, that I'm not even aware of.
Yeah,
So one of the
yeah,
reasons we forget is because we've still got those wounds, and
yeah,
we've still got that thought going on. It's never been addressed. It's only when you get an insight or something happens that you go, oh, I didn't even know I still thought that.
yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
had some counselling when I was younger, and after that incident with my dad when I was 40, I had some counselling, and one of the things he talked about was the inner child and things like that, and I never related to it then, I have to admit. I thought it was all a bit silly, and he made me look in the mirror and tell myself, he asked me what my friends would think about me, and then I had to tell myself these nice things that my friends thought, and I never really got into it. I thought it was all not true, basically. However, when I came across the principles, I saw what he was trying to do, and I thought, and it was many years later, like 10 years or so later, and I thought, I'll just have another little look at that then now from this different perspective. And I thought about myself as a little girl, and I have had this massive memory of must have been 6, and she was adorable. Like, she was skipping down the road. I can remember holding my dad's hand, skipping, and curly blonde hair, and just adorable, just light and joy and happy. And when I saw her, I realized she didn't know. She didn't know to do something different, or how could she be at fault for anything? And so I learned to love her, and sometimes I do think of her, and give her a cuddle, and that's all she wanted. She just wanted a cuddle, and I held her in my on my virtual lap, at that sort of, like, 50 years old, and held her and cuddled her and told her everything was going to be okay, and that's all she needed. That's all she wanted. She was love and light, and I hadn't thought about her ever like that. I thought about her as a naughty little, not very nice word. And then now when I see my little 5-year-old granddaughter, and it's just occurred to me telling you this story, that she's the sort of the image of me, like, when I was that age, and how absolutely gorgeous she is, and adorable, and just innocent and special, and everything, absolutely everything. So yeah, that whole thing of looking at a picture, or finding a way of connecting with yourself as an innocent young person, whatever age that is, I think that is very powerful.
I just when you were talking, was thinking about my daughter. And I just had a realization about how far she's come in the last 2 years since so she was really struggling like 18 months ago, as you know, and that's what led me to look for something to help me to deal with her. And since I've been able to love myself more and believe in myself more, I've been able to see that more in her. And just really recently, I've just been thinking now how much she's like a different person. And she started off at the beginning of year 7 like this really shy, awkward, not knowing who she was, had no identity, she just was lost. And the friendships that she made were with other lost people, which was nice because they were all kind of a bit awkward and a bit, they weren't the kind of in gang. And it was really nice that they sort of found each other. And she's still friends with them now, apart from just really recently, one of them who was a boy who was her best friend. He still really, really struggles. And all of her other friends, so there's about 5 of them, have ditched him because he's so unhappy himself that he can't treat other people nicely. But Kaya just always forgave him. And so he would do it again, he just nastiness. And like when he was feeling happy, he's lovely, like the loveliest boy. But then he just gets these dark moods and lashes out and calls people names and just isn't a nice friend. And everybody else had ditched him. And Kaya stuck by him until really recently, where she said, I've had enough. I can't deal with it anymore. And I said to her, what do you want to do? And she said, I just don't think I want to be his friend anymore, because, and I think that's where the boundaries and the forgiveness comes. Like, she was forgiving and forgiving and forgiving, because I was having these conversations with her about, it's not him, he's not meaning to be like that. He doesn't mean to be like that. He is a kind person. So she would forgive and forgive. But then it got to the point where she was like, I can't keep forgiving him. But she came to that conclusion because she's now got that self-worth, that she knows that's not how friends treat each other. And so she sent him a really kind voicemail, like a voice message, just sort of explaining. Things had come to a bit of a head, and she just explained really kindly that she can't be friends with him anymore, because although she, likes him as a person, he just can't behave in a way that a friend does, and all the things. And I'm so proud of her, because she's just, and she's not even, she wasn't upset, she just did it, and is now, she sees him, she's kind to him, but it's just, she knows she's done the right thing. And now her friendship with the girls that are left, she's so happy, and she can now enjoy the last couple of weeks before we move away without any of that kind of, pressure and sort of disruption that the boy brings. And it makes me really sad, because he is such a lovely boy, but he just hasn't been able to, love himself like Kaya's learned to, I suppose. But yeah, I'm waffling, I think. But I just realised how far she's come, which is...
That's amazing. Well, that's amazing and wonderful to hear. And I think you started by saying, as you settled, she's actually come that far because of what you've seen and what you've settled within yourself. I sort of made that up, but it sounded like that's where you were going.
Yeah.
And then as you point out, and then she's come up with naturally with a boundary that works for her.
Yeah.
And that's perfect.
Yeah. She asked me, shall I send this message? And I was like, well, what do you think? Is there any part of you that's like, oh, I'm not sure. She was like, no, I think I should send it. And I was like, well, then you send it. Because I wanted to teach her, that, we need to be forgiving and understand why people behave in certain ways, but it doesn't mean that we need to stand by and let them keep treating us like that. We can put that boundary up. And if that's what she chose for the boundary, I wanted to kind of let her do that. But I think when I stopped trying to fix her, stopped trying to focus on the things that were wrong with her and focused on the bits that were right with her. And it's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah. That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that.
I had a wee insight a few years ago about how we allow ourselves to be treated by other people. I was thinking about how if you walk along or on a bus in any sort of main high street, you sometimes see people digging in the bins for food, sadly. Why is that? It's because they're really, really hungry. They're not, you and I, we don't go around digging in bins because we're well fed. And I was thinking about how emotionally people do that. They go and they dive into bins and they will get affection and love in from wherever they can, no matter whether that's a good source or not, depending on how you see yourself and what you think you deserve. So a lot of people, I think, are in relationships where they are effectively raiding the bin, not because that other person is a bin.
Yeah.
I'm not saying
Yeah.
that, but what I'm saying is that's what you think you deserve, in the same way that someone is starving will look for a meal in a bin, whereas someone that's well fed would never think to do that. And I think emotionally there are so many people who are effectively doing that. They would never think to eat out of a bin, but emotionally that's what they're doing. And their relationships, they all look like that because that's all they think they deserve. And they haven't had a good meal in a long time where they've had any genuine love, affection in all its purity. So I think, you know, that is why some people allow themselves to be treated badly. It's
Yeah.
because they think that's what they deserve, which
I
is,
think that's
you know,
a really good analogy, and not just what they deserve, but sometimes it's just because you don't know any better.
yeah,
You don't know that
exactly.
you can maybe go to a food bank, you know, like you only know that you can raid the bin.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
um
it's all you know.
and it's where you look and it's where it is, and then it's a habit. And yeah,
Yeah.
it's a great analogy. Yeah, although I will say that I did know somebody, like a family, and they hadn't bought food for like a bit. It was a halfway house. It wasn't a family, you know, with parents and children. It was a halfway house, and they hadn't bought food for years because the one guy who was Polish used to go on his bike to the skips behind Tesco and Sainsbury's, where they throw away the sell-by stuff, and they'd eat like kings and queens, like, you know, well, kings, there weren't any queens there, but yeah, I mean, literally. And Rob used to help them out sometimes, and he'd often come home with bags of cheese and, you know, lobsters and all sorts of things that they got from these skips that Tesco had thrown away, you know. So
Yeah.
eating out of a skip's not always a bad thing.
Oh, it's not always a bad thing.
And there was a place in Bristol called Skipchin, and same thing, they used to get the skip food, and then it was a pay as much as you feel type place. So if you could afford to pay, you would, and if you couldn't, you didn't have to. And they would cook the food and serve the local people who needed feeding. So I think it was clamped down on because of health and safety, but I think it's a great idea. That food is not off, right?
No, definitely not. We throw away far too much.
Or the freezers would get switched off accidentally, or there'd be a fault, and so they chuck everything out of the freezer away. There's like tons and tons of food. Yeah, they used to rescue it.
Maybe it's not such a bad idea after all.
Well, there you go. Anyway, that's an aside. So this has hopefully been helpful, and I round it up with what Wendy was pointing to, and really as well in Erica's story as well, is that as this is the buddies call, you're all very compassionate and loving, and you know, I had a little read through some of the emails today because I knew I had this evening, so I spot checked some of the emails, and just what a lovely bunch of people you are. Very kind and compassionate and giving and loving. And my request is that you turn some of that to yourself. And thank you again. Thank you for everything that you do. It's amazing. Thank you, Emma. See you all soon. Is that it? Is that the end? Yeah, that's the end. Bye. Lots of love, everybody.
Thank you.
Anastasia, if you
Yes.
need some extra support, reach out. There's plenty of wonderful people that can listen. So
Thank you very much.
just reach
Yeah.
out, let Carola know, and I'm sure someone will, listen and just be there for you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Nice to meet you.
Nice. Lots
Nice
of
to meet
love.
you all, yeah.
Bye bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone. Love to you all.
Bye.